So I was looking at an article, and I know this is going to be a little bit controversial. And once again, this is talking about religion in the black community. So the article is titled, "Why Do Black Women Remain in the Church?" And so I uploaded that article and attached it to a channel of mine. And so I was reading this part right here, and it kind of really made me think, I mean, I just don't understand why people want to believe in things that may be doing more harm than good. So I'm going to read this, and I'm just going to read a paragraph, and then the rest of it I'm going to put like the title so you can read the rest of it. But it goes on to say a lot of observers attribute the pervasiveness of this level of religiosity in the black community to slavery. The truthfully, a comprehensive discussion of black religiosity would not be complete without exploring this history. It is widely accepted that religion has at various times and in some instances been used as a tool to manipulate and control. Indeed, the black church began under duress, on pain of death and eternal damnation. But some black people have gone so far as to profess their gratitude for slavery. Okay, I'm going to repeat that again. But some black people have gone so far as to profess their gratitude for slavery because it introduced their ancestors to Jesus and paved the way for their own salvation. Without slavery, the thinking goes, they would have been born into a pagan tribe and doomed to spend all eternity in hell, even though they never would have even heard of Jesus. Okay, did you hear that? So that's proof that Christianity and Jesus Christ and the Bible, all of this that's in the U.S. was never African based religion. It was never our religion. Of course, this line of reasoning is extremely faulty for a number of reasons, not to mention indicative of a cruel deity, not least of which because today many African countries are among the most Christian in the world. Okay? So, I'm going to stop it right there. I'm not going to go any further, but I will leave the link in my commentary at where I write at the bottom. But I show this photo here, this clip of this woman. If you look at her, she's a devout Christian and a churchgoer, and she goes every Sunday, probably throughout the week. And, she probably comes from a really well brought up family. Or does she? Is there something behind that personality? Well, my personal feeling, she doesn't look that friendly. And she definitely looks like there could be something else going on other than trying to save the world and humanity. And then you'll see another clip of a woman who looks like she could be humble and she's giving of herself and she's devoted all her time in reading the Bible and enveloping herself in Christianity and religion. But is she really what we think we're seeing? Or is it just something she's doing because she's pressured to do it? Or maybe there's a whole nother story behind this woman entirely that we don't know about. Maybe she is the problem. And she knows it. And so she's given a lot of people a lot of stress and anxiety. She could be a boss at her job or a manager. Maybe she's fired a lot of people. She's probably used the Bible as a weapon. And so, with that being said, these are just photos of people. We don't know. All you know is how people really are when you get to know people. And what I've learned is a lot of these women that I've come in contact with have issues. Everybody has issues. Everybody's human, and nobody is perfect. But what is a pet peeve of mine is when you pretend to be perfect and you pretend to be without blemish and without problems as if you are a robot. And that is not entirely true. Nobody is a robot. We're not perfect. We're not, without problems in our lives. We all have problems in our lives. We've had, some struggles. Maybe your struggle is worse, or maybe the least than my struggle, or vice versa. Um, but what I've experienced is a lot of hate, a lot of bashing, a lot of judgmental attitudes from certain women that come from these organized religions. And it's sad because I've gotten to the point where I really have distanced myself from it altogether. It hasn't brought me any closer to these type of individuals. It's actually pushed me away from them because of the judging and because of the belittling and knowing who they really are on the inside, that they're not perfect, they have problems, they're human just like anybody else, but they don't seem to look at it like that. They look at it as if that because they go to church on Sunday, or because they're a devout Christian, or they claim they're saved and sanctified and filled with the Holy Spirit, that they can do no wrong, and that they're almost acting as if they're God, like they can say who's going to heaven and hell, and they can point fingers at people and gossip about people and backbite and talk about people behind their back and talk about who people should sleep with, who people should marry. It just goes on down the list, and it's sad. And this is the kind of attitude that some of these women have. It's not loving, it's not embracing, it's not kind. There may be some individuals who actually try to help others, who actually try to encourage others, who actually are not judgmental. They may give you some suggestions, but they're not trying to live your life, or they're not trying to run your life, or trying to re-raise you and you're an adult and tell you who you should be in relationships with and not. They are really kind and giving of themselves, and they are unconditionally loving. You don't find that many of these individuals in these churches. Everybody thinks different. Everybody comes from different backgrounds. They've had different experiences. So not everybody is coming at you with that same mentality as, oh, I see everybody as God's children and we must love one another and treat each other with respect. That doesn't happen with all these women. And so when you see this church right here, you see the women, they're saved and they're dancing and they're in the spirit and all this kind of stuff. But you also have women who are just like this, who go to these organizations, and all you hear about is my pastor this and my pastor that. You don't know if she's sleeping with the pastor. He could be married and have a wife. She's sleeping with him. You don't know if this woman, she has a husband at home that won't work and he's abusive to her. So she makes like she's having a fabulous, wonderful marriage, but she's struggling in her marriage, and she goes to church, but the husband doesn't go to church, and he raises hell if she doesn't come home and fix him dinner. You don't know if she has kids that are in and out of jail, and she's belittling other people and talking about what other people's kids should be doing, but her kids haven't even finished school, or they dropped out, or they're in gangs, or they're getting out there in the street and getting into trouble. And she's talking about other people's kids getting into trouble, and hers are getting into more trouble than anybody else's. So a lot of times these women are not honest. Sometimes they'll make all of this showboat about being religious, but they have a story behind that religious or religiosity attitude. So a lot of times these women, they some of them, I'm not saying all, but there's some that don't have much education, and so maybe they come from a time where this was what you had if you didn't have anything else. And the culture is if you didn't have any hope, you had to have some kind of hope. And this kind of, it did help people get off drugs. It helped people in a tough spot, but I felt it was more the people you surround yourself with, if they're a healthy support group and safety net. You don't find that many organizations with those type of individuals that you can trust anymore. You got a lot of these churches who have been stealing money from the black community more than putting money into the black communities. The same thing is happening in Latino churches and white churches too, where you find out all of these scandals. The pastor, he's sleeping with, some underage, woman, a prostitute, or they're stealing money out of the church, or they're using money for fancy cars and mansions. The money is not really filtering back to the community. It's more for self gratification. You find out other things. There's a whole list of stuff, there's a whole history behind it. And then you have these mega churches. It can happen with the mega churches and the small churches, where there's scandals, people hurting each other, talking out loud at each other. And then you go on your job, and these same women will come to work and belittle co-workers because they don't believe in this kind of craziness and this type of religion, and they take bits and pieces out of the Bible. They really don't read the Bible. They just go. They're what you call a showboat Christian. They go, they show off their hats and their clothes and their cars and what they did, and gossip and shoot the breeze, and then they make a little food fight over who's cooking what, who's sleeping with who, whose husband is wearing what, who's got a husband and doesn't have a husband. So some of these women will go to church looking for men too. So I heard there was one lady had wrote a book about, how black women will go to church to pray, but men go to church to pray, like be predatorial. And so this lady, she's a writer, and she also does like relationship counseling and whatnot. So I listened to her, and she has a lot of important information about this type of stuff. So some of these women will go to these churches, and men do try to sleep with them. Even the pastors, the deacons, it doesn't exclude them either. But see, what I thought that black people should remember is also these people here holding the Confederate flag that voted for Trump, they also claim to be devout Christians, and that they're saved and filled with the Holy Spirit. And they go to these churches and they pray, and they talk about God bless America, and we have the Pledge of Allegiance, and we're teaching kids God blessed America, but we won't tell the kids about what black history really is and who we are as a people. The kids don't go to the library, they don't learn anything, and they don't know anything until they get out almost into the world, and they're shocked to find out that all this stuff that they thought they knew, there's so much more they haven't learned. So you have some of these women that'll go to these churches, they're looking for a mate. And that's how you find out these stories where men had given them AIDS, and the pastor, he had AIDS, and he gave it to most of the women in church because he's sleeping with all of them, because they're so loyal to going to church and loyal to black males that are up in these churches. And you come to find out that those guys are just as bad, maybe worse than the ones on the street that don't never attend. So I just think it's wrong to be judgmental to people just because they don't go to church and they don't read the Bible. I found that most people who do go to church a lot and read the Bible, that there's a lot of those people that aren't really that trustworthy. There's a lot of hypocrisy in the church, and that they're not who they say they are. Now, I'm not saying every single person, but I found that a lot of that is very, very predatorial people and hypocritical people in the church. So I think people should think about what they do and how they hurt people and judge people before they make it seem like the Bible is everything. Thanks for listening.